And hello, Internet. Please forgive me in that I don't really have much in the way of editing skills at the moment. And while it is very unprofessional, then this rambling diatribe that I'm about to go on could use some visual aids and the like. Consider this more of a podcast than anything else. Imagine working at a major pharmaceutical company. You come in work one day and find that you're being fired because you have a major in meteorology, and many of your coworkers have ganged up on you believing it to be pseudoscience. You see, a couple weeks ago you sat down and pinned a piece about climate change, warning of the dangers of it and offering some suggestions on what the company could do to help in a small part. Perhaps set up some designated employee parking closer to the building set aside for hybrid cars. Add recycling bin next to some or all of the garbage bins. Encourage carpooling and add a secure bike rack area to further increase and incentivize less car use. Your coworkers, however, are major motorheads. They get together and take their 60s muscle cars out drag racing every third weekend of the month, and they see this as an attack on them and their hobby and their lifestyle. So they take it to their supervisor, and since the company actually has ties to some petroleum organizations, they declared that your memo doesn't really represent the company. They refuse to mention what's in it, but they force you out for speaking your mind. Now, this happened recently to one James Damore, only it wasn't a pharmaceutical company, it was Google, and his master wasn't in meteorology, it was in biology. He wrote a memo suggesting that Google had become an ideological echo chamber, and that there should be some more diversity focused on minds rather than bodies. He was saying that despite giving some averages that might help explain why some differences in pay, in earnings, not necessarily in pay itself, can be explained not with a conspiracy and not with discrimination, but just tendencies and natural occurrences and just the impact and actions of individuals. And even though in his memo he specifically pointed out that averages are an aggregate and do not represent individuals, they can fall literally anywhere on the scale, but it can be used to help explain some things. He also wrote that he felt that the company was hostile to certain ideologies and ideals, and that if you didn't believe in what was effectively a progressive agenda, you would be ostracized. And, well, his point was proven when Google fired him. Now, this is not new information. In fact, right now, everybody is talking about this. But it is still important information. You see, YouTube, who is owned by Google, recently announced that they were going to start putting videos into a limited state, not because they violate the terms of service, but because they hosted offensive or extremist content. This limited state would mean they would not show up in feeds, they would not have the comment section enabled, they wouldn't have the likes, dislikes. They would effectively be set aside to starve and wither and die. And YouTube is a rather large platform. It does contain a diverse spectrum, and some of it ranges in the extreme. There are extremists such as some white supremacists. There are some Antifa who espouse violence against those who disagree with them. There are some hubs of Islamophobia, as well as hubs of Islamic extremist ideologies that also espouse violence. And YouTube kind of wants to get rid of that. The problem lies in that they don't tell you what these guidelines are. You see, once they have the guidelines written down, while it's true that others can look at them, look at some videos and say, hey, this violates this here, here, and here, other people who have videos that Google wants to take down but aren't actually problematic could look at it and go, well, hold on, I'm not violating any of these. I'm not doing any of these. Why are you targeting me? Because they don't write them down, they don't make it public, they can get away with whatever they want. And as we've seen, what they want at the moment might be a extreme ideology in and of itself. Now, this comes on the heels of the news that one Professor Jordan Peterson, who teaches biology up in Ontario, psychology up in Ontario, had his Google account shut down. It has since been restored, but his YouTube account with hundreds of hours of videos, his Google Plus account, which is the Google's alternative to Facebook, and his Gmail account were all disabled. And even on appeal, they denied to reinstate, and they denied to tell him why. Now, again, it has been brought back, but it was a troubling development that it could happen, that Google has shown they are willing to flip a switch and shut everything off if they don't like what you have to say. So who's helping them decide what they don't want people to say? Well, among others, they've announced that the Anti-Defamation League is one of the groups that they've contacted and reached out to for advice on this. So, who are the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL? This is a group, that goes out and looks for hate. And because they are invested in finding hate, finding something to be offended by, they're going to. You see, one of the things the ADL came up with this previous election in the United States was Pepe the Frog. Now, some of you may remember how Hillary Clinton started talking about how Pepe the Frog had become a symbol of the alt-right, white supremacists. Well, she got that from the ADL. Now, what is Pepe the Frog? It's a meme on the internet. It's a template. Sometimes it's called Sad Frog and all, but the original comic had it as Pepe. And what it was is just an image that people would modify in any number of ways to make different versions of the same effective thing. And there, of course, there were versions of it with an SS uniform or a Ku Klux Klan uniform on. But there were also versions of specific video game characters, of Jews, of blacks, of Muslims, of whatever you want to think, cowboys, spacemen, you name it. There's a version of it. Because Pepe itself was a template that anything could go on. And even if you want to argue that the versions such as the Nazi version or the KKK version were rooted in hatred, it should only apply to those specific incarnations. And even then, it's much more likely that those versions were just made to make fun of things. Because making fun of Nazis, of mocking the ideology, is a time-honored tradition. The thing is, they found something offensive, they put it on their site, and people ran with it, even though there may have been more to the story. This comes from a problem with inferring versus implying. Take, for example, video games. There was a lawyer named Jack Thompson who would go out of his way looking for violence in video games, calling things serial killer simulators and the like. Anything that looked like it could be violence, anything that looks like you could remotely possibly use it to stage how to shoot up a school. Well, that's exactly what the game was meant for, and no one would tell him otherwise. The problem with that was these games can be interpreted in different ways. But he was convinced that his interpretation was the correct one, that his subjective view was the objective truth. The problem is, anybody can infer something from anything. For example, let's take Tetris as innocent and ubiquitous as Tetris is, falling blocks and attempting to match them for points as the speed increases and increases, one could, if they were looking to be offended, argue that Tetris is a rape simulator. You see, the goal of the game, and you are rewarded handsomely for this, it is the highest rewards you can get, it truly encourages this behavior, is to manipulate the blocks, manipulate the stack, move them, coerce them into opening up. So you have one nice long opening which you then penetrate and thrust your hard long eyepiece into. And in doing so, you destroy that your penetrative power destroys that part of the stack. It's a rape simulator. Tetris. Now, does that make it actually that? No. Tetris is just Tetris. It's a puzzle game. Whatever theme you want to apply to it is entirely your own. It speaks more of you and what you're looking for than it does of what the game actually represents. But there are those who think that if they are offended by something that they create effectively, the offensive nature of, they are entitled to some recompense, for lack of a better word. And that seems to be where YouTube is going. Now, this is something to worry about, because YouTube is not alone in this. It came out recently, during the previous election cycle, that all of the big social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Google, they are trying to manipulate results to alter the narrative. The mainstream media is in this as well, with how they're portraying, say, for example, President Trump versus what President Trump is actually saying. There was a press conference recently by, I believe Scott Mueller was his name, on Trump's new immigration policy. And there was, again, nothing entirely offensive in the policy itself. It was mostly common sense things that people have been asking for a while. And Mueller came out and explained it, went down the list, gave facts, gave information. The media attacked constantly. They attacked him at the conference, pointing out that what they believed is some things like merit versus nepotism, that nepotism should win out, that for some reason forcing people to speak English, which is a requirement for naturalization, that having immigrants who spoke English, not the official language of America, but the language that is most commonly used here, is somehow racist, even though it is the number one in the world second language that people use, even above Chinese. If someone's going to learn a second language, it's generally going to be English, unless that's already their first language. So, and this is all over the world. There are many African countries where English is the official language. There are many Asian countries where English is spoken frequently. But somehow this was racist. Now, Mueller did a good job of pointing out the facts and figures and information. And the media didn't have a way to respond to him other than to mostly call him creepy, which goes back to my stance of focus on the idea. If you have to attack the person, you're generally not attacking the argument. They weren't making an argument. But you see the templates out there. They're trying to control the narrative, and when someone comes out who doesn't follow the narrative, they're disturbed by it. The president uses Twitter and talks directly to the people in town hall meetings, at rallies. Even when he's president, he's going out and talking to people directly and not going through the media. because the media is against him and constantly saying things that even came out recently CNN knows is untrue, with the supposed Russian hacking story that did not happen, that's still being investigated and pushed in the mainstream. Why wouldn't President Trump just go around them, go over them? But they're not the only ones who are trying to influence the narrative. And as cliche as it is with my animated background and nothing else here, it is equally cliche to bring up this book, 1984. Now, people almost laugh anymore if you suggest something's out of 1984 because it's so common, it's so ubiquitous, it's so juvenile practically. Oh, it's just 1984. Is that really all you have to offer? But people forget that the reason 1984 became such a sticking point of things to look at, of a good example, was because it really is that good of an example. It was written by someone, Orwell, who had become disenfranchised with the Soviet system, saw through it, saw the flaws in it, saw how it worked, saw how it was propagandizing. So when someone compares what's going on today, this manipulation of facts, this Twitter, Google, Facebook, hiding stories they don't like, hiding channels and videos they don't want, when someone says this is the ministry of truth, there's a reason for it. Google is out there saying, we have always been at war with Eurasia. And they are desperately trying to put anything that disagrees with them down the memory hole. Now, before this worries you too much, and it is alarming, you do have to realize that you aren't alone in fighting back, or wanting to fight back, or seeing through the veneer, as it were, whatever. There are several voices on YouTube, and even if YouTube tries to silence them, there are other places. You can hear them on the radio. You can see them on other social media platforms. Trump won, after all, because there's enough groundswell support out there that's fighting back. There are statistics and studies showing that the coming Generation Z is more right-wing, right-leaning, and anti-progressive than the millennials. Now, that's something that happens all the time. The pendulum swings back and forth, and right now we're on extremes. The left is practically in McCarthyism. Are you now, or have you ever been alt-right? And you can see them breaking down and flipping out whenever their views are challenged, because they're intolerant, simply put. They're the most intolerant. But they don't control the narrative anymore. We do. Keep that in mind. The truth is available. It is out there. Don't trust just me. Take a look at things for yourself. See what others have to say, and I hope you stick around and enjoy what you heard. I know this was rambly. This is really my first attempt at one of these, and to be entirely honest, I've recorded this several times now, trying to get it to sound somewhat appropriate, somewhat right. If you liked it, stick around. I'll try to make more. I don't know how often I can do this, but whenever there's something that I think needs to be said, even if others are saying it, you're not alone. And you shouldn't be afraid. I am terrified. But I have to try. Remember, if you disagree with what I say, I'm fine with that. Go ahead and tell me, and I will be happy to discuss it with you. Assuming I don't get so big that I can't keep track of everyone. That's entirely possible, though very unlikely. I like talking to people. I like hearing other people's points of views. I like debating them, and my debating skills are not great. I do hope that I don't degrade into name calling and the like. But I'm always happy to talk to anyone who's happy to talk as well. As long as you're not going to just throw insults if you want to have an actual dialogue. Well, there's a reason I say focus on the idea. Until next time, I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time.